Welcome back, readers. Today we're going to be doing a special short review video where I am going to be talking a little bit about the Last Hours series by Cassandra Clare. I just finished the third book in the series, and I haven't really talked about them at all on the channel, so we'll start with the first book. There's Chain of Gold, and then we have Chain of Iron, and finally Chain of Thorns, the biggest one. It's like trying to hold it. But so those are the three books in this series. I'm going to make just a little bit of room. So I just finished reading the third book and the second book a couple weeks ago. So I had read, so the second book came out like a year ago, and I hadn't read it until this one came out. Kind of like, so sometimes I have this horrible habit of kind of looking at the end of a book before reading it, and sometimes it just ruins things for me. I have no control of this. I mean, I choose to do it, but it's almost like I do it and don't have the ability to stop myself. So I found out the ending of the second book, and I was so upset by it that I could not read it for an entire year until this one came out, and I knew that I wasn't going to be upset by the ending. That's what I did to myself. That being said, overall, I think when it comes to these two, so the second book and the third book, I think overall the second book was a better book. And sadly, the ending of the series, the third one, is probably one of the weaker endings for her books series, which is a little bit sad. But overall, I liked the ending itself, like the way it ended, and characters ended up with the right people. Let's just put it that way. But the ending of this one, I disliked it so much that it kind of like makes it hard to decide which one was technically better for me. The first book, I loved the first book. It was great. It just the right amount of drama, suspense, romance, and ends the way you kind of want it to, with a bit of a cliffhanger as well as the right way. So this one was great. This is the best one in the series. It's hard to say which one comes next in second and third place, just because this one's better, but didn't like the ending. This one's not as good, but I liked the ending. So kind of have to like put them neck and neck. Hard to say. So that being said, it's essentially a sequel to the Infernal Devices. It's like the kids of the main characters in this series, The Last Hours, are the kids of the main characters in the Infernal Devices. So that was kind of fun. You get to see those characters as adults, and we have a new set of leads in the series. So some of the things I'd like to talk about is I didn't like the drama of the relationship with James, Cordelia, and Matthew. It's almost like, in a sense, she was trying to recreate the triangle from Infernal Devices, which is Will, Tessa, and Jem. But it didn't almost come across. It did come across for me as disingenuous. And part of that is because in the original triangle, they all selflessly loved one another and would have, done anything for the other ones. Whereas in this one, I felt like, mainly with Matthew's character, that he was very selfish. He was a very selfish character. And a lot of his choices were to go behind his best friend's back, his best friend in Parabatai. If you read Shadowhunters, you understand what that means. It's more than just a best friend. He goes behind his back, has essentially a relationship with his best friend's wife, runs off with her at the end of the second book, which is what I didn't like, and then acts like he's the victim because James is upset that he ran off his wife, even though Matthew ran off with James's wife. Like, you didn't think he was going to be upset? Even if you truly didn't believe he cared about her, you think he wouldn't, I don't know. It's complicated, and I can't get really too much into it with making like a 30-minute video, which I don't particularly want to do right now. So that kind of gets settled, because my thing is, anybody reading the book knows how James feels about Cordelia. Matthew is just unable to see that, and it's interesting that he is in no way able to see that when it's obvious for people like on the outside who are looking at like James and Cordelia who don't know them in the situation. It's obvious to them, like at the end of the first book, at the end of Chain of Gold, Magnus remarks that it's obvious to him that he sees James loves Cordelia. It's obvious to him, just like us, the readers. But yet, the person closest to him is unable to see that in any form. I don't know. That being said, a little bit of why I wasn't a huge fan of the finale is I won't spoil it but there's a certain main character that dies in this book, but I feel like it was unnecessary to the plot. Like, it didn't actually do anything or move anything along. It just kind of happened to happen. Like, she needed to kill someone, and this particular character didn't really have like a love interest or a romance going on, so let's just, we'll kill him. It doesn't matter. That's what it felt like. Like, it didn't do anything to move the plot along. He could have not died, and you could have had the exact same ending to the book series. And if you were looking for, a death to make an impact and a punch, there were other characters that would have done that better. So, I don't want to say too much about that because I don't want to, like, give away that particularly since this book is newer and just came out. That being said, it just was very anticlimactic in a way. It wrapped up very nicely in that everybody who was in a romance, they all ended up together and everyone was essentially happy. Another issue I had overall with this series, not necessarily just this book, but the series as a whole. In the first book, so spoiler alert, a certain character named Barbara Lightwood dies in the first book. And my issue with that is a lot of people have an issue with it because there's this family tree that comes out, but it's all messed up, and you find out why in the third book, this one. You find out why it's all messed up and things are all crazy, and it shows that she doesn't die and all of that. But that's not why I have an issue with her dying in the books, because the books are supposed to be intertwined. Like, each series is a part of the same series as a whole. So the Infernal Devices happened before this. Everything that happened in those books happened prior to these books, right? So the third book, the last book in the Infernal Devices series, in the epilogue, we see everybody. Will Herondale is, on his deathbed. He's super old. He's like in his 80s, right? 80s, 90s, something like that. He's super old. And standing around him is all his friends and family, including Gideon and Sophie's two daughters. Gideon and Sophie's two daughters. They have only two daughters, Barbara and Eugenia. So if Barbara's dead in this series, there's only one daughter alive. So unless they have another daughter at some point that we don't know about yet, that hasn't been born yet, there's this plot hole and discrepancy between the two, but they're supposed to be the same series as a whole. And that's kind of the issue I have with that. Not so much that she died. I mean, that doesn't necessarily bother me, but the fact that there's this disconnect between the Infernal Devices and the Last Hours is an issue for me. Because it just makes this plot hole that I don't like. Don't like it. It annoyed me when I read Chain of Gold, and a lot of people, her death annoyed them because of the family tree, but it annoyed me because the Infernal Devices. Their two daughters were alive, now there's one daughter, and Thomas, but he's a boy. Thomas is a boy. But, that's also one of the issues I had with it. Overall, though, they're great. I love them. I could talk for like an hour about the Shadowhunters in general. I might write a post to go a little more in depth on it. But overall, I love James and Cordelia. They're my absolute favorites. They're meant to be together and, happily ever after, which is why I was okay with reading the second one, knowing that. Because I do these things to myself. That being said, I think my least favorite character was Matthew. I get why people like him as a character. I really do, because, people like broken characters who have, growth and all of that. And I usually like that in a character, too. But for me, it just came across more as selfishness rather than just selfishness and pity and poor me, I'm the victim of everything kind of mentality, and I didn't particularly care for that. And mostly because of the way he essentially treats James. And in the way that at the beginning of this book, when James does show up in Paris after Matthew and Cordelia run off, James is at the point where he essentially says if she's happy with Matthew, if she wants to be with Matthew, he'll walk away. Whereas it feels like with Matthew, he just wants what he wants, and it doesn't matter about necessarily what she wants. He knows she's in love with James, but that doesn't matter to him. And I think that's also part of the reason. Whereas his is more like, I want what I want. And I don't even feel like he truly loves Cordelia. I think he's just in love with the idea of her. And there's a line in this book that Thomas basically sums it up perfectly. I don't know where it's at. If I write a longer piece, an article or something, like article type piece on it, I'll find that line. But I feel like he's in love with this idea of her, that she's going to save him, and not necessarily her in general. Which is why I think James is willing to give her up to let her be happy, and Matthew kind of just acts the victim when she chooses James. But no more of that. Overall, definitely read them. You have to read. There's a reading order. You have to start with the first three City of Bones. Not City of Mortal Instruments. It starts with the City of Bones. But before you read these ones, you also have to read the Infernal Devices, because you will 100% have lots and lots and lots of spoilers if you don't read the Infernal Devices first. But we won't continue on for another hour talking about Shadowhunters like I could. So go ahead and you hear that? That was my refrigerator making lots and lots of noise. But go ahead and check them out. Chain of Gold is the first book in this series. Clockwork Angel is the first book in the Infernal Devices series. And so if you haven't read those, go read those first. There's a million of these books, but go ahead and check them out. I love Shadowhunters, as I'm sure if you follow me, you know. So until next time, let's get reading.